ice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Rob.
And I'm Dungeon Master Matt, and we have a guest with us today. Author, designer, blogger, hellcow, man in black hat, Phoenix Don Juan, never gloomy, the Illa Master, a guy who doesn't party with rock stars, he makes card games with them, the Whisper in the Flame, the true cause of the morning, the only man to confront Rich Burlew in a world-building contest and live to tell the tale. I had a 13th thing about him, but I forgot it. So without further ado, here is Keith Baker. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
In case you're not aware, friends, listeners, there is a new book coming out in the Eberron campaign setting, Exploring Eberron. Keith, you want to tell us what it's about? Sort of pitch it to us. We're excited about it. But yeah, tell the listeners what's going on.
So I created Eberron about 15 years ago now. And the thing about it is there's been editions of Eberron in, obviously 3rd edition. We had a number of different source books. 4th edition, there was the Eberron Player's Guide, the Eberron Campaign Guide. 5th edition, we have the Wayfinder's Guide and Rising from the Last War. The main thing is it's a huge world with a lot of elements, and many things just have never actually been explored in the depth that I have always wanted. For example, Eberron has its own unique planar cosmology, but we've never had a Planes of Eberron book. We've never had more than a paragraph on each of the planes. And even though Eberron came out in 4th and 5th, a lot of it was sort of going back over the basics for people who knew nothing about the world. Previously, up till now, it hasn't been possible for anyone except wizards to produce content. And so I've never been able to write about these things. But now that it's available on the DMs Guild, this was clearly an opportunity for me to finally write about a lot of the topics that I love about Eberron, but that we've never really just haven't made it into the core books. So Exploring Eberron, it offers my take on a number of basic things, a number of the religions, for example, sort of how I personally run the Blood of Vol, the Silver Flame. It also delves with my take on how the last war was fought, sort of some basic things like that. But it also delves into the planes of Eberron in a lot more depth than we've ever had. It delves into the aquatic civilizations of the Thunder Sea, as well as Droam, the nation of monsters, the goblins of Dakan, and also, among other things, the dwarves of the Roarholds, because we added a new twist to them in Rising, but didn't explore it in much depth. And, well, I do here. So it's a
Finally,
chance
you can have a dwarf with sweet shades and a tentacle whip growing out of his arm.
We've always wanted.
Exactly.
Horrible mutant dwarf with, symbionts on it. I love it. Yeah.
If you see the cover of the book, you may say, why is that dwarf wearing sunglasses? And I'm saying it's not because of the sun. It's because you don't want to see what's under them. But there you go.
I have to apologize here, because when we did our review for new DMs a long time ago on the show about why you should play Eberron, we had to, put in the section of the episode, do you have any critiques of Eberron? And we said, well, maybe the dwarves could use a little work. They're maybe less interesting. Sometimes I feel unenthusiastic about the sovereign host, the main pantheon of Eberron. And it's like you were listening to our episode and you filled in those gaps and made all the things that could be turned up to 11, turned up to 12.
And this is the thing with the dwarves in particular. As I say, a lot of the topics of Exploring Eberron are things that I've wanted to deal with for a decade. The dwarves in particular were when Jeremy Crawford, James Wyatt, and I were sitting down to work on Rising from the Last War. One of the things we said is, what can we do with the dwarves? Let's make them a little more interesting. And the storyline for them, it's based in everything in the past. It's not like a complete divergence. It's just shifting
There's no
the balance
retcon
of a few
here.
things. Yeah, it's just shifting the balance a bit. But it made me sad because I liked that twist so much that then Rising doesn't really go into it that much. And so I was like, I definitely want to actually really take a look at essentially the impact of the dwarves fighting an active war against the Dalkir, some of them incorporating symbionts into their culture. And to me, I really wanted to say, what's that look like? Like, what is the impact of that? And so I was very glad to have an opportunity to do that.
Very cool. Well, you're talking to maybe the world's only dwarf superfan. So I am always, my main complaint every time I read a new setting is, why have the dwarves not been given more attention here? Tell me about the dwarves. So I'm really excited about exploring Eberron. It's yeah.
I do think that of the iconic characters in Exploring Eberron, Rusty probably is my favorite, who is the aforementioned dwarf with sunglasses.
And this is, I think, a unique source book in terms of like where you would place it on the dungeon master versus player spectrum, in that it's not like a gazetteer, right? It's like deep world building and ideas for plot threads that could be character based. So if you want to make an Eberron character that had deep ties to Droam, if you want to make a character who is a goblinoid character who just came out of a Fallout style vault, and is experiencing the world for the first time, this book is perfect for that. But also if you're a dungeon master and are looking to develop deep plot threads that connect to the planes, it's perfect for that. So it's kind of unlike any source book I've seen, in that it's not clearly a player or a dungeon master source book. It's a deep Eberron source book, and we love that.
Well, and one of the things that sort of ties to my, principles of world building is we tried to keep it from being sort of too chock full of spoilers, for all those reasons. But the biggest thing to me is whenever you're making something up, whether it's history, whether it's religion, whether it's a culture, you ultimately come down to, why does this matter to the players? How does this impact a story?
This was my favorite part about your first section, Ages Past, or your first chapter. I love building a world history, or I love reading world histories, though I tend to find that when I'm reading a setting, most of the time that's the least interesting part. And what you've done here is you've written a little section. Why does it matter? Which I think is just such an obvious thing to include, and it's so helpful, I think, for both DMs and for players. I'm going to steal this for sure, because even if I don't title it that, it's just like, why should you care what happened 100,000 years ago? And there are reasons, right?
Right. And that's exactly the thing, is that in Rising from the Last War, we don't talk much about the ancient history. If you compare Rising from the Last War to any of the older campaign guides, one of the things people will say is, well, you don't really talk about the old history. And part of that was, well, we're not really going to burden you with a lot of lore that doesn't matter. So with Exploring Eberron, I've said, well, I'm going to go back and talk about that, but let me tell you why it matters and what you can do with it, and whether it's inspiring a character idea or whether it's a story that a game master could tell. And I'll say that's one little detail sometimes people talk to me about world building essentially say, well, how deep do you go? How much is too much? And my thing for any random detail of history, like, do I make a list of kings of, Daskara, or whatever it is can I come up with 3 possible ways that this could be relevant to a story? Whether it's a player hook, whether it's a DM hook, is there some way that I can imagine someone caring about this detail? And if I can't think of a story that would actually need someone to know who the 3rd king of Daskara was, then why am I sort of burdening everyone with the homework of doing it? It's actually a weird little detail, because we get into Thelanis and the Fae. And I think I talked about this actually on my blog, is a lot of people have said, what are fairy tales of Eberron? What I've always said is, that there's nothing wrong with stealing from our world and just changing some of the details. That, oh, you have Sora Catra who cursed the prince of Braylon so that he fell into an enchanted slumber and the woodcutter's daughter had to rescue him. You know, take the basic tropes we all know. And beyond that, if I'm just playing this with my friends, I might actually ask one of them, well, you tell me the story that you learned as a kid. Because the whole thing is, it's the difference. If we're doing this together, if this is just you and us playing a game, it's the difference between me telling you this is a story you heard as a kid and me saying, you tell me a story you heard as a kid, in which case you feel like, oh, I'm familiar with this. I know this because you made it up. Whereas the more obscure and weird and different and new it is, the harder it's going to be for the players to feel like, oh, my character has this deep connection to this story, which I don't actually remember the details of anymore. You know, so there you go.
I'm trying not to fanboy out too much here, Keith, but this is what I've always loved about your world building is that it is all so logical, and you've always think out, well, what would be the consequences in this world if, you know, people could cast light or prestidigitation or what have you, or if different species existed alongside each other. But in no way does that logic following of your world building in any way cut out the mythological, the fantastic, the incredible, the surprising. You know, I feel like some world building DMs run into the problem, well, they just sort of, oh, well, everything is determined by the geography of this world or the two cultures, and there's never any twists, and they follow the logic without adding in the fun that makes playing in these worlds so good. So how do you balance the, like, having a world that feels real and lived in and logical with all of the crazy shit that happens in Eberron and in Eberron's history and cultures and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, it's a tricky sort of balance to have, because it is particularly a lot of people immediately do want to try to, for example, map cultures from our world to cultures of Eberron, and that is something we actually tried not to do.
Rookie mistake.
Yeah, you know, Karnath, you can certainly say, for example, has aspects of Prussia, of, you know, Transylvania, of all of these things, but it's not supposed to be any of them. And Thrain,
I gave all of my Anduirian characters in I gave them French accents,
and there's nothing wrong with that.
But yeah, you know, like
See,
I kept telling my players, listen, these are the accents I've picked, but don't read too much into it. Yeah,
exactly right. There's nothing wrong with saying I'm going to latch onto an accent that then lets me feel there's a consistent tone to these characters, but that doesn't mean that Andere is supposed to be France.
Right.
You know, because it's supposed to be what it is. It's a culture where they're building on arcane magic, which no culture in our world has had. And this came up, I did a long series of blog posts on Raedra in Sarlona recently. And part of the whole point to me is it's not supposed to be. A lot of people say, oh, it has the sort of mysterious sort of East sort of feel. And I'm like, it is a mysterious culture that is isolationist and uses a different science. But beyond that, it's a culture where psionics are part of everyday life. It's a culture that is shaped by nightmare spirits from, you know, from dreams. Don't limit yourself by trying to sort of force it into the whole shaped like a nation of our world. And yet at the same time, it is exactly what you said, Matt. You've got to find that thing of, if people have nothing to latch onto, if it's too abstract, if it's too broad and vague, then they don't know what to do. They can't create a picture of it in their head. And so it's that line between giving people something concrete that they can work with, but also being comfortable shifting things up, changing on the fly. And this is, you know, one of my points of always, if I'm playing my home game, I'm always going to be engaging with the players. I'm always going to be asking them questions, and I'm not going to be afraid to change something in the core canon if it's just not the story I want to tell here. What I think the most amazing thing about tabletop role-playing is that it is truly collaborative storytelling. That if you read a novel I wrote, if you watch a movie, it is one person's vision. Or in the case of a movie, a whole bunch of people changing the script writing. I mean, whatever. But, but still one person's vision. Whereas I love the fact that if we are playing a game of D&D, it is a unique story that we are making together. I have one adventure I ran in Droam that I've run that adventure 56 times. And it has never been the same twice because it's got a lot of interesting decision points, and every group, some have followed, similar paths, but every group has done something that I've never seen before. And I love that.
That's great. Yeah.
Speaking of Droam, this is one of my favorite sections of the book. And speaking of mixing myth and the real world, right? You have what would happen if you have a country in the world, a major political power that is run by, these nearly immortal, not quite immortal hags, and no one knows what they want. And you give us so many great ideas to build stories off of that. I love that we finally got into what makes Droam tick.
I actually wanted to ask a question about this because one thing I've always loved about Eberron and why I stuck with it when I was sort of losing interest in other settings is that you give traditionally evil races or monstrous races like actual societies and motivations, and they're not just a here's a bad guy. And this is something that I have never really liked. I always wanted to know more about orcs, and I always wanted to know what the goblins were up to. Do ogres have a society, etc.? And so this has always been a part of Eberron. But why did you decide to, I guess this is a question from a long time ago, but why did you decide to break with, I guess, tradition and start trying to, flesh those out in a way that, was relatively new?
Well, it's funny because actually the first published D20 adventure I had was called The Ebon Mirror by Atlas Games. And in that, what happens, a party of adventurers find a ruined wagon. They're delivering these cursed magic items to a village where the local holy person will destroy them. They find this ruined wagon. They keep going. They run into a farm. It's on fire. It's clearly being attacked, and a goblin runs out with a spear. And 9 times out of 10, they will of course kill the goblin. It's clearly attacking the thing. And spoiler alert, what they discover is, oh no, the goblin's the farmer who was just trying to defend his farm, and it is halflings on blink dogs that are raiding the village. And the point is, when you find the wagon, you've been shifted into this world where orcs, goblins are the sort of filling the role of traditional human and demi-human races in D&D, and it's humans, dwarves, halflings who are all in the the traditional goblin and orc role. And so part of it was, and I always just loved at the time, people were so ingrained in that goblins are evil that, as I said, all the times I ran this, I never found someone who stopped and said, maybe this goblin is maybe we should talk to him first. And when they find, the goblin kids in the farm, and they have to be like, oh crap, what do we do now? So part of it is that I've never accepted that whole concept of sort of genetic evil. I accept the idea of why it was done in some settings is we just want a clear, disposable bad guy that you never have to stop and question your actions. It is okay to kill these things, but I've never liked that. And,
sorry to interrupt, but D&D
please,
gives
please.
you undead, which is, actually you can complicate that in a lot of ways, but you don't have to have
zombies and skeletons are the clone or the robot troopers of Star Wars.
If you just want to kick down a door, you want to kick down a door and kill things, there's a whole dungeon full of zombies and skeletons. You don't necessarily need goblins and orcs. But continue.
And so that's the thing with Eberron. Part of the point was to do things differently than they've been done in, for example, Forgotten Realms, and not because that's bad, but because that existed. And so basically this is why an Eberron religion takes a whole different form where we don't even know if the gods exist. It's why goblins and orcs, we're saying they aren't any more evil than people are. What I like about the goblins, part of the point there was to say they had this civilization that once dominated Corvair, that humans essentially are the colonizers who came in and took everything. And so there is a concrete reason for the goblins to feel that humans are invaders, tomb robbers, all of these things. And so there is a concrete reason for tension between them. But that is not goblins or evil. And in fact, frankly, I think the goblins are on the right side of history in this whole, sort of mess. That I like that point of the player goes into the tomb, they get the cool magic sword. Yeah, this is what D&D is all about, right? And then they run into the goblin who says, that's Excalibur. It was buried with King Arthur. Why the heck did you just go and dig it up, you jerk? And what do you do at that point? That a random magic item in a dungeon probably has history. And, we just generally don't think about it. So I think answering the original question, the point is what we said with Eberron from the beginning was it was based on the principles of pulp and noir. And one of the noir aspects where that comes in is the idea that good and evil aren't always clear-cut, that answers to questions aren't always simple, that it's asking interesting questions. And so in running into the goblin, you might be enemies, but that doesn't mean that it has to be simple and that you have to be able to just feel I am justified in trying to kill this person.
It makes me think, in some ways, Dungeons and Dragons, in the sense that there can be any monolith that is Dungeons and Dragons, has come along more to this line of thinking. And it's not just, these species are always going to be evil or not. It can be even more basic things like the way magic items work. Fifth edition is more Eberron than the third edition is. And so, I mean, I'm just curious, like, how you feel seeing, like, Wizards putting out a statement being like, well, the orcs depicted in Eberron are the way we want to do things in the future. By the way, we've had this for 15 years now and stuff.
That's the one I snicker at a little, is that the statement I've seen a couple times is, in our last 2 books, we presented things in a different light. And I'm like, yeah, except one of those did it 14 years ago. But I think it's a good approach, so I'm glad it's becoming more mainstream. But yeah, there's a couple of other things that I do feel, even before the most recent thing, there were a couple more general sort of trends towards not everything is reliable on alignment, as you said, sort of magic items having a more recognized impact on the world. And so I think that's great. I mean, I do think Eberron is exotic enough in a number of ways that I understand why Eberron itself would not become the core setting for Dungeons & Dragons. I get why Forgotten Realms is a more common setting because it is more traditional, more Tolkienian, all of that. At the same time, if there's certain philosophical aspects of Eberron that are worked more into the mainstream, I think that's great. But I do think it's funny seeing that, oh yeah, we just made this change, when I'm like, yeah, just happened. No one thought about that.
We were happy to see it, but it actually, that reminds me, we're in 5th edition now, and you've written or been working on four books, I think, for it. And I'm just wondering, Eberron started as started mechanically in 3rd edition, and has transitioned through 4th and into 5th. So what do you like about writing for and designing for 5th? Do you miss anything from the previous editions? We love things about all of them. I'm not trying to drag you into an edition war or anything. I'm just curious if there's stuff that you like or things that you enjoyed from previous editions that you'd like to bring back.
Actually, I mean, it's funny, because obviously Eberron was designed for 3rd edition, but there's a lot of things about about 5th. And I'm very much with you, by the way. I think every edition does something well. And it's all about what is the kind of game you are looking for. With that said, even though Eberron was originally designed for 3rd, I actually think it fits 5th really well on a number of different levels. 3 things that immediately come to mind: the existence of cantrips is a good thing for Eberron as being thus everyday magic. The idea that you can have a wand slinger You know, someone who just uses spells instead of magic isn't something that was possible in third. But in fifth, yeah, great. You know, whether you're just a warlock using your cantrips as your main thing, or whether you're just get the magic initiative feat, you can have that person who I use firebolt instead of a sword. So cantrips are good. Rituals, that was something I liked when they appeared in fourth, but in fourth they were a little too broad and vague. But it works very well. Vancian magic never quite made sense for a magical economy. The idea that a locksmith could cast arcane lock twice per day and then he goes home for the day didn't really work. Whereas the idea of, oh, it takes him 10 minutes and it costs him 15 gold, he charges you 30 gold, and he can do that as often as he wants, is much more, it makes the magical economy make sense in a way that we kind of hand-waved it a bit in third. And the final aspect of it is Eberron was always based on the principle that player characters are remarkable. And in third edition, we did this by having NPCs use NPC classes, which a lot of books and settings really didn't even pay attention to. They were in the DM's guide, but a lot of people didn't bother. Fifth edition sort of has baked into it, NPCs don't really use classes. NPCs do what you want NPCs to do. And as I said, that fits the overall idea of Eberron actually better than third did, because it was that whole idea that in Eberron, the bartender shouldn't be a 10th level fighter. Like, even as a first level wizard, you're still kind of cool. And so all of those things, you know, with all of that in mind, I think it actually works pretty well in fifth.
Speaking of the kind of flexibility and the specialness of character stuff, there's a lot of really cool stuff for characters here. We've got some neat new subclasses and sub-races, as well as a ton of advice for all of the special Eberron races. One of my favorites is Asmar race for elves only, with their special connection to the Undying Court, and some great new cantrips. Finally, we have the Magecraft cantrip in the 5th edition rules. It's a much more elegant solution to the Magecraft cantrip than Rob and I wrote in our...
Matt and I, you don't know this, but Matt and I, actually before the official Artificer was released, we spent a lot of time homebrewing a conversion into 5th edition. And I think we did pretty good. And some of the ideas that we had ended up in, we're very close to what ended up being official. But yeah, our Magecraft cantrip was, we tried. And we couldn't get it right. Yeah, so this was
no
great.
Worries.
Yeah.
One thing that made me feel really well is that, really good, is that in this book, there's a cantrip called Force Blast, which has, except for a 20-foot range difference, is the exact same cantrip we put in our Artificer supplement, because we're like, Artificers, they need more options for damage, and Wand Slingers need more need a long range spell to snipe things. And
and part of it for me, part of what that spell was just, there's a section that's just talking about how the last war was fought. And so there
cool.
is a
siege staffs, force.
I loved this section. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I love this section so much because like you, or both of us, you know, when I've been designing my own games or worlds, or like trying to like extrapolate, I'm like, what would a war look like, right, if it were fought with either magic or magical items? And so I love to read this. I loved reading this section about, here are the tools that were used. These are the implements that, you know, allow large scale, you know, mass combat in a magical world. And yeah, it felt coherent, right? It was like, if you have a bunch of people who could do a little magic and some people who could do a lot, what would that look like? And this was one of my favorite sections. I really liked it. So
and one of the things about it is that there is a source book, Forge of War, but what disappointed me with Forge of War is it talks about the history of the war, but it doesn't talk about the tools. And I'm just like, it doesn't get into what is war like in a magical world. And so that's mainly what this focuses on here. There's also some little details that I kind of liked, because I've always thought about them, which is, again, given that point that players are remarkable, and that most of the people in Eberron are, third edition terms, they're first or second level warriors. In fifth edition terms, they're, bandits or whatever you want NPC stat block you use, is that the point is these people only have somewhere between 4 and 12 hit points. That a lot of times what you see is, oh, if this is a giant cannon, that means it has to do a ton of damage. And I'm like, well, it doesn't actually have to do a ton of damage, because what it has to do is be able to kill a lot of the common people. And so my point is it needs a bigger range, that a fireball does a lot of damage in relatively, when you're thinking of a vast battlefield, a relatively small thing. It's a squad level weapon. And so it's overkill. It's designed for use against a small elite force. And what I like about that point of saying, oh, well, you've got to have something that is much larger, but might only do, say, 3d6 damage. That what that allows is the players on the battlefield. Oh, the giant bomb goes off and half their unit, goes down, but the players, they managed to get some shelter and they survive, which is what we would want to see in a war movie of characters out on the battlefield. You don't want to see them just get killed by the first blast. You want them to be able to persevere where the mass of the army is being devastated.
I like this a lot. You have a little explanation in here about your average troop levy has a handful of hit points, and it doesn't take much to bring them down. And I think this is great for creating dramatic moments, like you just said, but also for reminding the players of their relative, position in the world, right? A bomb goes off and, their squad is eliminated, but
right.
they're still alive.
And it's back to that point that hit points are a nebulous concept. And
right.
They call this out in multiple different sources, that the point of you having 20 hit points when that soldier over there has 6 is not that you could be stabbed 4 times and he can only be stabbed once. It's that you, through luck or skill or whatever it is, don't get stabbed until that final stab. And so it's not that you're ridiculously durable, it's that you're able to duck, you're able to grit your teeth and keep going. And so again, it's not that the damage has to be immense, it's just that you're lucky to survive it.
This book, to bring it back to the book overall, I think this book is, for me as a longtime Eberron fan, an absolute dream book to have for planning my next Eberron campaign. Even if you're not like hardcore Eberron fan, if you take this book and you combine it with, the Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron, Explorer's Guide to Eberron.
No, Wayfinders, you had it right.
Wayfinders, sorry, I'm getting all the, God damn it, 5th edition. Why can't you name your books normal things? All right. and maybe City of Towers plus this book is like all you would ever need to run a really interesting campaign. And there's more stuff in here that I think we can even get into. Your take on the plains of Eberron. I am stealing all of the things in this for my next Planescape one-shot because it's so different.
My campaign that wrapped last year, which was the 3-year Eberron campaign, leaned heavily on Dark War, and I'm cranky that this came out now and not 2 years ago. But honestly, I love it because it matches up with how I had sort of imagined it and a lot of the things that I had speculated on. So that makes me very happy. And maybe this will give me an opportunity to revisit that and have the players return. As somebody who has run a long run game in Eberron, the previous books gave us a ton to work with. So I was never struggling for content, but every now and then I would run into something where I was like, oh gosh, I really wish I knew a little bit more about this plane or about this Dalkir or whatever. And so this fills in a lot of those gaps for sure.
Well, and it's certainly the case that, as we said about history, part of the point with the planes here is what I've tried to do with each plane is not only go deeper into what is its sort of driving nature, what is its story, but also how can this enter a campaign even if you don't go there? This isn't just about planar travel. each one talks about, well, what are artifacts that you could find that come from this plane? What are the impact of manifest zones? What are story hooks that could relate to it? And so it's back to that planar travel is usually a sort of higher level option, but there's still lots of cool ways that the planes could impact a story, even if you never actually go to them. And certainly there's some, for me, many of the planes, Dalcor in particular, are things where, I've always sort of had a pretty clear idea of what that's like in my head. But there's a number, planes like Fernia or Regia that I've never really thought out in that much depth. And I've never really liked, Fernia, it's the plane of fire. Why don't we just have the elemental planes if that's what it is? So there's a couple of those that I'm actually sort of surprised how happy I am when I actually sat down with it and actually ended up being like, wow, no, I really like, now I want to do something with this. Kithri, the Churning Chaos, is a good example of a plane that I never really thought was going to be that interesting. But when I actually sat down and wrote it up, now I can't wait to have people interact with it.
And the same goes for planes that, if you're an Eberron fan, you already know are interesting. Zoriat, Dalkir, right? There are so many cool things. I would love to take the players to, the maze of reality, or the part of Dalkir that's
They're
just
already in it.
No,
That's right.
when I got to the part where it's like the Dalkir have reset the world hundreds of times, I was like, yes, this is a great twist. You could optionally throw at your players.
Yes, they've been in Groundhog Day this whole time and just never known it.
Wake up the music.
This you don't have to. You don't have to reveal the your secret sauce or anything. But this hearing you talk about it, this has been already full of great advice for our newcomer DMs. And I do hope they all listen to it. But it makes me wonder, right? So you already gave us your tip on like, do you plan the lineage of every, king line? And no, the answer is no, you don't, depending on whether or not it's relevant. But when you're, putting together your planes or your nations or your broad regions, how much do you sketch out? Because when I'm world building, I tend to actually, leave enough so that I remain interested, and this depends radically on whether or not the players are likely to ever go there. Right. But sometimes it's more or less. Do you have a concrete way of deciding, this is enough, this is too much, here's what I'm going to leave open?
Well, it depends on, just for basic rules of world building for me, it depends on, again, who it's for and where I'm planning to go. So basically, first, you have the very big difference of, is this for publication or is this for my friends?
Right.
Taking something like, basically the next question is, I will either start small and detailed and work out, or start big and narrow, and define down. And with Eberron, we started big because from the beginning, we knew part of this setting is travel, is going to exotic locations, is, and this is a world where we want you to be able to tell stories of war, of espionage, of pulp adventure. Like, it needed to be able to support all of those. And so it needed a lot of detail at a high level early on. Usually, I'm more inclined to start small and start with a particular place. Like, I will say the last Eberron event I ran was campaign I ran was set in Kabara, the sort of jungle frontier on the east. And it basically is just a Western. It's Deadwood in D&D, D and Deadwood. And part of the point there is I defined the village that the players were going to start in detail. We worked out who's the sheriff, who's the preacher, the role that the players had. I worked with them to actually say, tell me about someone in the village who's important to you. Tell me a detail about the local tavern. So not only did I build it up, but I got the players to build it up. So I knew that they had characters they already knew going in. Like, it wasn't just my village, it's their village. But I didn't plan out like the entire region around it. When when I'm getting ready for the adventure, I'm like, great. Well, it turns out there's an old mine just north of town. I didn't make that up before, but I never said there wasn't an old mine. And part of the advantage of that was this is a frontier. Nobody does know. You are the first people who have poked into this old mine for 100 years. So the setting essentially allows for that, because I've said this is a place that we don't really know what's 10 miles that way. Beyond that, I do feel that leaving yourself some room is always a good idea. That, you know, with Eberron itself, one of the biggest, most concrete examples of this is the morning, where Eberron is defined by this terrible war, which came to an end in a magical cataclysm called the Morning. And what we have said is we are never going to tell you officially what caused the Morning, because it is not important to the game. The impact of the Morning is what is important to the game. The cause of the Morning is not. And because what that means is, for every game master out there, it's up to you. Will people find the answer? If so, what is it? And how does it tie into the other plot lines that are important to you? So if you're playing with the Dalkir, great. The Dalkir could be responsible for the Morning. If you're not using the Dalkir at all, they've got nothing to do with the Morning. And I can easily, off the top of my head, say, here's my top 5 things that it could have been. But I'm still never writing that down, because the point is, I love that when I go and play in someone else's Eberron campaign, I don't know the answer. You know, it's not, everything doesn't have to be defined. I will say one of my favorite little random things in exploring Eberron is I have a table on page 13 called Untold History. And I'm just going to flip. Yeah, I'm going to flip to it right now. The point is, Galifar lasted 1,000 years, which is a huge amount of time. And rather than saying, well, let's actually try and spend a bunch of pages telling you every cool thing that happened in that 1,000 years, what I've done is just thrown at this table and said, if you're like in a small town and you need something cool to have happened there, just roll on this table and see what we come up with, or pick options. So, you know, I could say, oh, this was the site of a brutal battle connected to Elgin Druids, which was mysteriously forgotten. And, you know, nobody knows what happened. Or that it was the site of a rebellion tied to an alliance of peasants, which is actually commemorated with a holiday. And so you've come in just in time for Uprising Day, you know, and that the whole point of that is, ultimately, at the end of the day, we can make up history all we want, but what it comes down to is, why is this going to be interesting for the story that you're going to tell?
And then you roll on that table, your players come to that village with the peasant uprising, and all of a sudden your game is now about overthrowing no sovereign hosts, no dragon mark houses. It's
absolutely
a full peasant revolution in the wildlands between Thrain and Onder.
Yeah.
And yet, of course, that's my point. I certainly have had that kind of thing happen more than, than once, for sure. But that is what I love. Is that I thought this was going to be a murder mystery, and it turns out that no, it's a revolution. And
right.
And I love that this gets to be the game that we want it to be. I will say, in the game I ran 56 times that I told you about, that is a murder mystery. And one of the things that happened there is, the third time I ran it, we're about 2/3 of the way through the game, the players say, okay, stop. And they lay out all the clues, and they say, all right, it was Colonel Mustard. It's clear. And it was not Colonel Mustard. It was Miss Scarlet. But the thing is, they had interpreted the clues in a completely logical way that I just hadn't seen. I'm like, no, that totally makes sense. And so as a game master, you're at that point of, well, I could just go ahead and it's Miss Scarlet, and they'll be like, no, I didn't see it that way. I could try and re-push them the way I want them to go, but like I said, their logic makes sense. Or I can do what I did, which was like, yes, and when they pull the mask off, it's Colonel Mustard, and they're like, we are the best detectives ever. Because, like I said, they worked on it. They made sense. It's just not the story I had seen. And that is what I love, is I can make that change. I can make it, this is the movie the way they want it to be. Whereas when I watch a TV mystery and I'm like, oh man, that doesn't make sense, it should have been that guy, I'm stuck with it. And so I do love that. If they want it to be a revolution, then okay, it's a revolution.
I love that example, because I've run recently some published modules, and I'm not going to call anything out. They were wonderful in other ways, but
Yep.
they had very specific clues, right? They had very and they were good, and it made sense from my perspective, knowing everything. But my players, I mean, I didn't have, they didn't need hand holding, but they definitely needed some help, right, to get to the right conclusion. And that felt frustrating because I was like, they have all the information and they're drawing the, good conclusions, and they're not like taking the next step. And
Right.
and that's I guess one of the things about published adventures is a problem. But when running your own games, you're like, okay, that makes sense. You've logically put together all of these pieces of information. You're right. It is an aristocratic conspiracy, and they're sacrificing babies. Absolutely.
Yep.
That's what I intended from the beginning.
And that's the reason, frankly, that I have this adventure. I've run 56 times, and I have never written it down or published it because it is so flexible. That so much of it is, and by this time I know that town, so well that if the player comes up with something new and unexpected, I can adapt to that sort of immediately. Whereas trying to write down every possible path that people could take in this 50 things would be this huge, immense book of options, So like I say, I haven't done that. And again, to be clear, the answer here is not, never let your players fail. It is not that your players should be handed the answer to every mystery. It's that in this case, they come up with a good answer.
Right.
And if they were just clueless, I'd try and push them another way. If they were just being dumb, what can you do? Can you drop something? Can helpful NPC? Can something happen? But on the other hand, if they've just seen the facts in a way the writer of that published adventure didn't see, or they have a story they want it to be, we can make, these are our stories, and that's what I love about tabletop role-playing game.
Now I'm actually just a little bit sad because once, Keith, you came to Alcon here in Houston, Texas, and I'm guessing you may have run that adventure, and I was unable to go to it because I was helping organize the convention. I was so disappointed, and now I'm even more disappointed. But I will for a future convention in the later time. So
yeah, there's an excellent chance. I have 3 or 4 convention games that I've run, but I'm pretty sure I would have been running the Dro-Am game when I was at Alcon.
The stupid dealers and their problems, tables and needing electricity and things.
Somebody has to bear that burden, Matt, and it's you. You sacrifice for the cause.
Be me.
We appreciate it. We appreciate it.
Matt, do you have any final questions?
I think I have maybe a good one. And of course, Keith, if you have any final things you want to add, you're welcome to. Reading this book, I got a little tinge of bittersweet sadness in that I was thinking, is there anything else to come from Keith Baker and the Eberron team in the future? And now I hate to ask you, what's next after you've just finished a massive project, but do you think there are more Eberron books coming in the future, or is this at least for now, working on other things?
Shall we weep because there are no more worlds to conquer or
worlds to build?
There are so many more worlds to conquer. So this book took about a year to make, all told, for many reasons, and part of it is it ended up being 100 pages longer than originally planned. It's a 240 some page book.
It's a big boy.
Yeah, it's a large, you're a large adult son.
I will say that certainly what I do next, I want to start with a couple smaller things. Basically I don't want to be, I'll see you again in a year, just because it takes a lot of things, and frankly, even financially, just to go there, you can't, it's a long time between projects.
Yeah.
There are still so many parts of Eberron that I couldn't fit into this. As I said, I've been running a game in Kabara. I love Kabara, but just didn't fit into this book. I'd love to deal more with the Demon Wastes or the Eldine Reaches. Didn't fit into the book. So yes, there are many more things I want to write about. I suspect that I will probably, try and do maybe some 30-page things. Part of what I like about Exploring Eberron is that it is big enough that it is a big, solid print-on-demand book. It feels, like it is actually in word count longer than Rising from the Last War. And the shorter ones obviously won't fill that thing, but I definitely want to be doing, I have more Eberron things I want to know, although part of that depends on how Exploring Eberron does. Is there interest? So we'll see. Assuming there is, I have many more things I want to write about. I also do write about Eberron topics on my website, keithbaker.com. That's Keith-Baker. And I did, in fact, just write a whole bunch about Rhaedra in Sarlona, which all told probably around 20,000 words of new Rhaedra material. So each month I try and tackle some new topic in some depth. And
every time I've run an Eberron thing, I feel like I have at least once or twice in planning out the campaign reference your old Dragon Shard articles or something on your blog, because it's just a super helpful wealth of information.
Well, and you mentioned Ogre civilization, Rob, and I just have to say that, hey, the last article I wrote about the provinces of Rhaedra, in fact, talks about Ogre civilizations. So there you go.
It was something I was thinking about. I bookmarked it to go back and read more about. Yeah.
Here's a random question for you. If, hypothetically, Wizards of the Coast or your Patreons gave you $100,000 and said, Keith Baker, you have to write us a brand new D&D campaign setting, what would be the colors or palette of world building that you would use to make it?
Oh, that actually is a question that's too broad in scope for me to give an immediate answer.
It's a big question.
Part of it is that I do love Eberron so much that there's still so much unexplored that I'd love to dig into. And one of the things people have said is, well, what's Eberron look like in 10 years? You do a future Eberron. I'd rather go to the past. There's so many interesting points in history that pre-Rhaedra Sarlona, the Decani, the Silver Crusade, there's so many of these interesting points that I could run a whole adventure there. To me, what's the big question I need to do is stop and look at what is out there now that we have Wildemount, we have Theros, and basically say, part of the point of Eberron was Forgotten Realms was the other big setting at the time, and it was saying, well, what are stories that don't fit there? That we're going to have a setting where religion is based on faith rather than gods walking around and you can't punch, Orion in the face. We're going to have a setting where orcs aren't always evil. To me, the first thing I would stop and do is say, what is the story you can't tell in the settings that we have right now? And I have to say, unfortunately, off the top of my head, I don't know what that is. But
you answered my question with a question, but it was a very good question.
Well, thank you.
Keith, any final thoughts for us before we let you go? Thank you again so much for coming and talking with us.
No, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited that Exploring Eberron is finally coming out. It's been a long road, but I really hope people will enjoy it. Again, if people have other questions, I write way too much stuff on my blog. So feel free to check that out. And I just hope that people are having fun playing games.
All right.
Hell yeah. Thanks again for coming on the show, Keith. Links in the show description to both Keith's blog and the store page for Exploring Eberron out right now on the DM's Guild. Thank you again, Keith, for coming on the show. Rob, say the thing. Thank you.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep rolling them dice.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
Cheers.
And the baker will come.